The U.S. government and its monopoly money printer, also known as the Federal Reserve, have painted themselves into a bankruptcy corner. Not only are more and more foreign nations rejecting America's aggressive and militant foreign policy, but they are also ridding themselves of the Fed's dollar. The U.S. total debt is more than the GDP of every country in the world combined. We are a dying nation. Private analysts have for years been stating that the combined U.S. foreign and domestic debt was astronomical. In 2014, American university professors stated that it was $222 trillion. Now a new report suggests that the real U.S. debt level may be $400 trillion, or 20 times higher than the country's gross domestic product. The calculation includes government, state, local, financial, and so-called entitlement debt. A.B. Bernstein, a global asset management firm based on Wall Street, came up with these figures by including in its analysis not only traditional levels of public debt, such as bonds, but also financial debt as well as future obligations for entitlement programs. These include Social Security, Medicare, and public pensions. In its report, A.B. Bernstein took debt from a number of sources and compared it to GDP. Using this methodology, federal, state, and local government debt combined amounted to 100% of GDP. Households and firms accounted for 150%, while debt held by financial firms came to 450%. Another 27% came from trusts for social insurance programs, 484% from promises under current social insurance programs, and 633% from obligations for social programs. The total debt, therefore, amounted to 1,832%. U.S. debt is large. And it's growing. But if we want to think about debt problems, in any sector, sovereign, households, firms or financials, the conditions rather than the levels are more significant, the report said. It suggests that, although the figures seem depressingly large, it is important to understand that not all of the debt obligations are concrete, and there may be leeway. This is especially true for the government programs, which form the biggest potential debt but can be changed by legislation or accounting. Debt problems arguably have already happened at lower levels of debt if the macro conditions forced it. Crisis measures work both ways. An apparently smaller level of debt can cause major problems at a time when the economy is at its weakest, for instance, in a financial crisis. At the same time, larger levels of debt can be harmless if other conditions, for example, leverage levels, or debt to capital, are sustainable. The total outstanding federal debt, which recently surpassed 100% of GDP, will approach 109% of GDP in 2021, assuming the U.S. Treasury finances part of the upcoming spending from its unusually large cash balance, while general government debt will reach 127% of GDP in 2021, before surpassing 130% by 2023. Without the intergovernmental obligations, debt held by the public amounts to $16.7 trillion, or 78% of GDP. A default on U.S. Treasury bonds would be catastrophic to the global economy. Borrow $1 trillion a year. Transfer $1 trillion a year to the billionaires. Add $1 trillion to the debt of the grandchildren. What could go wrong? Further, we kick the empty can, the bigger the pain will be. Or the bigger we inflate the balloon, the bigger the boom will be when it explodes. And the next step is negative interest rates. That way, they think others will pay us to borrow their money. This is what happens when you sink all your money on military and police, and $23 trillion of that is unaccountable by the military. Last but not least, wait and see when a real audit is made on the supposedly 8,000 tons of gold. Technically, the US dollar had been in the ICU since petrodollar back in 1971. It is pretty obvious why there has not been a real and honest audit. It would prove that big lies were told and big crimes committed, and the consequences for the preppers and even the public, in general, would be serious indeed. Debt intentionally grows out of control. They are going to force reset with a digital currency that the criminal elites have 100% control over. Total world domination is their goal. And they are going to get it if people don't wake up soon. Private petrodollar reserve currency backed by military force and extortion of spy agencies. Running a country is like an organized crime cartel. If you can't afford to repay your debt, Pick a fight with the countries you owe money to, and all debts are void. The only way for the USA to fix this is to kill its creditors. Will the USA start World War III to wipe the slate clean? War is coming, folks. Welcome back to the Atlantis Report. You are here for your daily dose of the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Please take a second to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to also hit the notification bell. This past nightmare, 11 years of economic recovery, has been nothing other than another debt-fueled drug binge that is now falling apart in the US and globally, and total world debt is now nearly $250 trillion as a result. It is increasingly difficult to hide that red elephant under a rug. As soon as the large pyramid scheme of the Western financial system enters its terminal phase, the possibilities for putting even more fake money into the virtual mattresses known as banks are exhausted. That will be the moment when confidence in the entire system collapses. We see the signals every day. The markets show that again and again. The central banks also only have a choice of two evils, deflation or inflation. Because the first is worse, the second path is automatically followed. Inflation extends their control by another day, another week. This is like a man who is falling from a building and, in the meantime, is trying to grasp everything to prolong his life and postpone the moment when he crashes. Even the IMF now recommends that interest rates go even deeper negative. It is really astonishing how these people with no experience in the real world are trying to sustain the Marxist Keynesian theory, while more than 10 years of negative interest have failed. These idiots do not understand that negative interest rates have wiped out pensions and savings, and ultimately purchasing power. Even deeper negative will not force people to spend more, just make them bankrupt. In the meantime, the banks and their economists have also managed to convince the people that it is great to stimulate more spending with extremely low interest rates, and the resulting insane house prices are good for the economy. People who take out a mortgage in the current madness market expect to buy something that will always increase in value, but all they really do is purchase even more debt, which will turn out to be a lead stone as soon as the system collapses. The USA is the most indebted and insolvent country in the history of the world, and all of that debt is coming crashing down all over the place. The only question is why interest rates have not soared upwards across the board to default levels, but that is what is coming next as much of the country veers towards and to default. The new U.S. household debt numbers show that Americans have borrowed higher and higher amounts of money every quarter for the past 5 consecutive years. Collective household debt has surpassed $16 trillion for the first time. The debt level is enslaving Americans, and sooner or later, the music stops. When the music stops in this capitalist game of musical chairs, it ends badly for some while others sit down, hoarding the massive wealth they got from those without a chair. The wealth doesn't disappear, it just moves into different hands, the same hands of those playing and stopping the music. There's no money to save. Plus, there's a bankruptcy court on every other corner now. Rich get richer. The working middle class declares bankruptcy, capitalism at its finest. This happened when the richest class destroyed the middle class. Working class down to the American poverty class and destroying the people's ability to pay their bills, including health and wealth taxes. Raising interest rates will only trigger a downturn and increase inequality via rentier extraction by finance, deepening the depression via negative reinforcement of deflation. Under deflation, you can get relative inflation if the household income falls faster than prices, as the economy and tax revenues fall sharply, increasing government debt. The 30s, for example. This is why the only solution to an economic downturn is economic redistribution and debt write-offs. This is the economic cycle, overconcentration of wealth, leading to a collapse in demand, increasing private debt and economic collapse, and increasing inequality. This depression continues until the lower orders get annoyed enough to organize and force redistribution and debt write-offs. This is the economic cycle and why ineffective. Otherwise, capitalism will eat itself and ensure a long economic downturn, such as in the late 1800s. Capitalism is dynamic, the rate of increase of capital with respect to time. If capital is concentrated, capital accumulation collapses, and with it, the economy, with the rate of profit falling below the rate of interest, causing widespread default and a zombie economy weighted down with debt. And without investment, as the falling rate of profit incentivizes hoarding. America went bankrupt in 1933, and we have been owned by globalist bankers ever since. The fractional reserve system creates money out of debt and only debt. The scam is only the principal is created, but interest, not created, is expected to pay it back. It's like a musical chair. When the music stops, someone is left out. Bankruptcy and failure are built into the system. Wake up, America. Time to end the corruption in the financial system. We are all debt slaves to the globalist bankers. Money is added or removed from the system by these corrupt bankers by lowering or raising the interest rate. The banking system is, give me control of the money supply, and I care not who makes the laws. The recipe for world rule, and when technology reaches a certain level, they will have no need for the useless eaters. America will never pay its debts. American foreign debt is an essential robbery toward other countries. This national debt is a total disgrace. The ticking nuclear national debt time bomb that will soon go kaboom. With economic collapse and stock market crash, the entire federal debt, which has already surpassed $28 trillion. $3 trillion more this year alone. And that is on the up and up. By 2028, America's government debt burden could explode from this year's $28 trillion to a staggering $50 trillion. At that point, interest payments would absorb more than $1 in every $5 of federal revenue, crippling the government's capacity to bolster the economy and constraining the private sector too. Contrary to their claims, the U.S. can't grow fast enough to shed this burden. The debt is going to go up regardless. Simply because we live in a debt-based monetary system, the Fed has to continually create more debt to pay off the previous balance. It will go on and on and on until it all comes crashing down. In the absence of decisive, quick action to tackle this slow-motion crisis, the best-case scenario for the next few years is that America becomes a much riskier place to do business. A high debt load will limit our flexibility to keep the economy on an even course. Countries with high debt don't respond aggressively to downturns. Our budget deficit has ballooned by over $1 trillion. This is the only time in the nation's history the deficit has exceeded that level, excluding the 4-year period following the Great Recession. The U.S. government pays $479 billion a year to service its debt. If interest rates were normal, the servicing cost would be over $1 trillion. By 2028, the accumulated debt is expected to roughly match the size of the economy. If our oversized public debt explodes into a full-blown crisis, no one can say we weren't warned. Of course, America's fiscal picture was becoming unsustainable. What's astounding is how much worse his tax cuts and spending increases have rendered the outlook, and how quickly. And as the debt load grows, efforts by the Federal Reserve to stimulate the economy with lower rates would be more likely to feed runaway inflation. Then, investors will dump treasuries. That will drive rates far higher and make the budget picture even worse. The debt overhang will have real impacts on Americans, imposing higher borrowing costs, changing retirement as we know it, and slowing the rate of growth. The plausible options for fixing the situation are diminishing, but fixing it should be a first-order policy priority. In the end, it's impossible to know how this fiscal imbalance will play out. But at least two things are clear. 1, the problem got a whole lot worse over the past year. And 2, we are not finding our way out of this mess anytime soon. This is a ticking nuclear time bomb. It doesn't matter what clueless Jay Powell and his troop of uber dovish and desperate Fed monkeys do. This charade will end very, very badly. The real question is, why are we never told who it is that actually owns our debt? After all, whoever controls the debt, controls everything. I am sure the deep state will find ways to remain intact while defaulting on the debt they are accumulating while taking control of the world's factors of production. So the government has trillions in debt, our money, with absolutely no intent to pay it back in full, and yet somewhere we are forced to pay the government more, or we go to jail. Not liberty. This is debt slavery. End this show and get the reset going already.